Thank you very much, Bodhinath. Thank you very much indeed. It's a very perceptive introduction. Yes, and don't worry about the mindfulness thing. Ever since I've written that book, I'm constantly saying, and I've written a book on mindfulness, every time I do something unmindful. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about this evening, and make sure I know what my time is, that's right, is I'm going to be talking about connecting with the Buddha. And I've got a particular angle on it that I wanted to explore, which is an angle that I've just been sort of thinking about. One of the ways to connect with the Buddha, just start straight away, is to write about him. So in my new book, The Journey and the Guide, the guide obviously is the Buddha. When I say the guide, I mean a capital G, the guide, the guide. So I wanted to link the great stages of the path, which is what the book is about, the stages of spiritual life. I don't like that term spiritual anymore, but stages really of a deepening human life. I wanted to link that directly with the Buddha's life. So throughout the book is a kind of parable-like life story of the Buddha, and I've linked the stages to that. But what I found writing those parable parts of the book, written in a slightly different style to the rest of the book, is that just writing about the Buddha, I felt closer to him. I felt that episodes, stories which I've heard, like you have heard, I'm sure, most of you, many, many times before, I saw things in them that I hadn't seen before, and which deepened my understanding, perception of the Buddha. So I want to talk about one particular part of that tonight. But I want to sort of preface that by first of all saying that we don't know who the Buddha is. So when I'm standing here, slightly embarrassingly, giving a talk on connecting with the Buddha, I don't really know what I'm talking about. Yeah? And you don't know what I'm talking about either. So we're fine here. We're like really equal here. I don't know who the Buddha is, nor do you. So we have this image of the Buddha here, and we have them in all of our centres. But we don't know really what that image represents. We really don't know. In fact, as soon as you think you know who the Buddha is, you're in trouble. We really don't know what it means. Just because we got these words, Buddha, enlightenment, and so on, we had no idea what that means. It's a bit like you could have a word called ice cream, but unless you've ever tasted it, you've no idea what it is. It could be a curry for you, It's unlikely with a word like that, but anyway. So the first thing I wanted to stress about connecting with the Buddha, in a certain sense, the first thing to connect with is that we don't know who the Buddha is. My little niece, Alex, who at the moment is 7, going on 24, when I ask a question, she says, I have no idea. So if I was to say to her, who is the Buddha, she said, I have no idea. And that's our situation. We have no idea what we're talking about. And I think it's really worth stressing that because we've got words, we so easily fall into thinking that we know what the words mean. Even ordinary words like patience, we often don't know really what it means. But when you get to words like Buddha, enlightenment, insight, and so on, we really don't know what we're talking about. And we need to be really clear about that. Yeah? So that's the first thing I want to say as a sort of preface, is that when I'm talking about connecting with the Buddha, I don't know what I'm talking about. And nor do you. I always like to include my audience. Second thing I wanted to say as preface is, just to contradict myself, is that we sort of do. I've never been able to... I think there's more thought that needs to be done about this, and that means I'll need to do more talks on this subject, because I do all my thinking in large rooms in front of people, which can make me very engaging, but it's awfully rambling. Anyway, do you see what I mean? So we don't really know who the Buddha is. And that's true. It seems to me ineluctably true. And it's also true to say we sort of do. If we literally didn't know who the Buddha was, then there could be no Buddhism, there could be no meditation, there could be no path, could there? Because a path, by the metaphor of a path, suggests a direction. A direction has to have a goal. If we haven't got a goal, you haven't got a direction, you haven't got a path, you've got a car park. As soon as you've got a path, as soon as you've got a direction, you've got a goal to that direction. So if we didn't sort of know who the Buddha is, then there could be no path and no direction. We literally wouldn't know what to do, because we wouldn't know which way to face. Yeah? We wouldn't know what took us towards the Buddha. So we sort of know, but the sort of is very important. We have an instinct for the Buddha. In effect, effectively, we couldn't know the Buddha at all, literally at all, if we didn't have something within us that chimes with him, whatever he represents. If we had nothing in us that remotely approached that figure, we couldn't understand the figure. Just as if sometimes you look at like ancient Egyptian figures now, for most of us, we just don't feel any resonance anymore because we've lost that world, if you see what I mean. So for instance, all of us can feel at times that we're in touch with, as I say, that life has intrinsically a kind of direction. Anytime you go deeper in life, anytime I go deeper in life, whether that's in meditation or in study or in friendship, that feeling where you suddenly start to feel, this is what my life's about, my life is going somewhere, life itself is going somewhere, it has intrinsic meaning, and I don't mean sort of Buddhist meaning, it has intrinsic meaning and value, and that meaning and value is perceived as a direction. I particularly feel it on retreat. I've just recently come back from a 4-month retreat in Gukyaloka, and at times I felt, I think, as happy as I've ever felt in my life. A sense of my whole life coming together and going in a particular direction. I even, slightly strangely for me, had a sense of my lives coming together. I come from the Midlands. I don't know whether you can tell by my accent. I come from the Midlands, and you're not allowed to think things like that. It's all right when you're further up north, but in the Midlands, there can be no mystical dimension. So I've had to sort of break with my upbringing. But on this retreat, at times I felt that my lives were being fulfilled in this moment of the retreat, and that this retreat was going towards somewhere, a direction. So we sort of know who the Buddha is, but it's very sort of, and it flickers, doesn't it? Sometimes we feel that connection with the Buddha. Connection is too strong a word, really. Hunch, kind of woolly, kind of incoherent, kind of instincty thing, that there is a path, and that path leads towards something that's intrinsic to life. But it's very, very subtle, and it easily goes. It's easily lost. All you need to do is go to a shopping mall and it's gone. Something terrible, isn't there, about shopping malls? They're kind of, all the gods have been dispersed. Okay, so that's where I wanted to start, that we don't know who the Buddha is. We absolutely don't know. So there's no question of connecting with him, because we don't know what he is. He's not even a he, for a starter. Not in any way that we can say. He's not even human. So when he was asked, people had this issue with him when he was alive. They say, "Gosh, you look kind of something about you that looks really like kind of good. There's something about you. Are you a god?" And he said, "No, definitely not." "Are you an angel?" "No." And they said, "Are you a human being?" He said, "No." Bhante Sangharakshita says that the Buddha is a wholly new species unto himself. But it's interesting that he says he's not a human. Basically, he's saying, what you mean by human, no, I'm not that. And of course, what we mean by human is having a self in the centre of the universe in which we gather our experience around. That's what humanness is to us, is me in the centre of the world, and you all looking at me. It's just how I like it. So I am in the centre of the world. That's what being human is. It's putting yourself at the centre of things, isn't it? And arranging your experience around yourself. And the Buddha is saying, well, no, I'm not a human. So we really don't know who he is. We don't know anything about him. He's the stranger to us. And I rather want to keep him like that. In a certain sense, it's a shame we have images of him even, in a certain sense. We need them, but from another perspective, it's a shame we have them because it would be good to have a space, a kind of lit space of imagination, really. I'm not suggesting to remove the Buddha from the shrine, but you see what I mean. And then secondly, I'm just saying that we sort of know who the Buddha is, or we have some sort of hunch, some glimmering of connection, and that our spiritual life is about fostering that connection more and more. But what I want to focus on is not so much the Buddha as the enlightened master. I think sometimes it might be more helpful to focus on Siddhartha, the pre-enlightened man. The Buddha is too far away from us, but perhaps Siddhartha can help us more in some way. This is what I came to think. So, for instance, well, the question I've been dwelling on, the question I've started on in my book, is the Buddha-to-be, Siddhartha, seeing the four sights. Does everybody know about the four sights? I will explain them, but according to the legendary stories, and it looks like they are legendary, we don't really know. They're probably a pre-Buddhistic kind of thing that they fit the Buddha's life into, you see what I mean? But actually I blithely want to ignore history and talk about the myth. Myth is talking about a deeper truth than history very often. So according to the story, he's in the palace. He's not allowed to leave the palace. His father doesn't want to leave the palace because he doesn't want him to know the truth about old age, sickness and death, because then he'll feel uncomfortable and then he'll leave to search for the truth. We all know the story, it's almost too well known. And he goes out to see, and he sees old age, sickness and death. He sees an old person, then he sees a sick person, then finally he sees a dead person. And each time he comes back to the palace, deeply shaken by the experience. So I wanted to focus on that first. I wanted to focus on that. So for me, the palace is a symbol of our habitual mindset. I think it's a very interesting, it's a walled palace. And in Siddhartha's case, it is a palace, it's not a prison, although it acts like a prison because he's kept in it. And you see that our sense of ourself is either a walled palace or a prison. If you're in a very negative place, your self-sense is a prison. I mean, I've experienced that in my life where, particularly when I was a young man, my sense of myself was very, very painful. If you're a positive, sort of upbeat kind of person, then your self-sense is a palace. But whichever way it is, it keeps you constricted. It's your habitual mindset. Yeah? So that the story of the Buddha leaving the palace is a story of someone going beyond their habitual mindset. And that habitual mindset is characterized by unawareness. Yeah? So if we think of the palace in that way, I feel like one of those American pastors who wanders around all the time. Anyway, and I go off camera, which is even odd. If we think of the palace in that way, do you see that it makes much more sense that you leave your habitual mindset, your habitual unawareness, you venture out into the unknown, where you actually start to see things. And we all know what the Buddha sees is old age, sickness and death. And that's where the Buddha's story starts, that's where Siddhartha's story starts. And of course Bhante Sangharakshita, he makes the point that he Siddhartha really sees old age, sickness and death. He sees them as if for the first time. I mean, this whole metaphor of being kept in the palace is probably highly metaphoric. I'm not sure, but I very much doubt it's literally historically true. It's probably more like saying it's as if he saw them for the first time. In other words, he really saw them. We see old age, sickness and death all the time. Just a glance at the news, just a glance down the street, just a glance at our mirror tells us those facts, but we don't really see them. So the first thing that struck me is why don't we see them? And why did Siddhartha see them? So there must have been, for Siddhartha, he must have had some degree of sort of psychic health. He must have been from what little we know about him, he seemed to have been a very healthy, non-neurotic man. So he would have had a very healthy psychology. Bhante talks about that we need to be a happy, healthy human first of all, and the Buddha would have been like that. He would have been a happy, healthy human being living in the palace of himself. You know what I mean? And that somewhere he must have felt that palace of himself wasn't enough. And he wanted to look further. And probably he either realised in his mind or literally saw, as if for the first time, that he would grow old, he would get sick and he would die. And he really saw that. So one of the reasons that we don't see that is because we're not aware enough. This is starting my sort of little argument with myself, as I often have. We're not aware, so we don't really see it. One of the dangers of Buddhism is that if we're not careful, we can forget that we're not aware of it and just bring in a Buddhist cliche like all things are impermanent. It's not meant to be a cliche, but it starts to act like a cliche to us. It's easy to say, it's easy to give talks about, but it makes no difference whatsoever. It's just something we say because that's what Buddhist people say. Yeah? It's what a sort of Buddhist tribe say, all things are impermanent. Gosh, that's made all the difference. I never thought of it until now, but now you say it, I feel quite transformed. But it is interesting, isn't it, philosophically, when you think about it, that we can both know something and not know something at the same time. So we do know that old age, sickness and death are the facts of life, don't we? Nobody thinks, oh God, I've never thought of that. What a surprise. Even small children know that. I remember with Alex when she was about 3, or perhaps a bit older, she's perhaps 4, she said to me, have you got a daddy, Maitreyabandhu? And I said, no, I don't. And she said, is he dead? I didn't even know she had the word dead at that time. Is he dead, Maitreyabandhu? And I said, yes, he is, he's dead. And what happens when you die, Maitreyabandhu? I thought, here we are. We've got this far already. So I said, well, no one really knows. No one really knows. People sometimes say they know, but they don't know. Nobody really knows. But what Buddhism says is that there's this bright white light, and you go into that and everything feels kind of different. And she said, yes, but what happens before that? As if that was perfectly straightforward. It's like, yeah, well, whatever. But her answer was if, yeah, well, that's perfectly straightforward. But what happens before that? So I said, well, you say sorry to anyone you've hurt, and you say thank you to everyone that's... So thus we went on, yeah. So even children have an awareness of death, a dim awareness of death. They tend to think it is a status of person. So the reason she was excited was because I had a dead father, which is a different kind of father. You have living ones and you have dead ones. And now she knew one with a dead one. So she thought it was a status of person. But I think we often think that as well. That the dead are like when you think of your own death, it's like you, but dead. A status, that'd be interesting. I can tell people how it felt. There's a sort of weird thing that you can report in about it. Anyway, there you go. Thank you. I'm being fed water. I'll have another one. kind of water coming my way. As I was saying, yeah. So it's weird though, isn't it, that we know that we're going to die. That's what I was trying to say. We know we're going to grow old. We might have grown old already. I've certainly grown older. I remember recently carrying a friend's daughter on my shoulders and looking through the window into a hairdressing salon and seeing myself in the mirror and thinking, oh, when did you grow so old? Because your self-sense is quite strangely behind your actual sense, isn't it? And it's still a shock to catch yourself in the mirror. And it just shows you that your inner sense of yourself. We have a picture of ourselves that we carry in our head. I didn't mean to say any of this. We have a picture of ourselves we carry in our head. And it's not quite a lie. Like, I don't imagine myself with black hair like I used to have and 24. But I'm not as old in my mind as I am when I look at the mirror. It's weird, isn't it? Anyway. So we know these things are going to happen, and yet we don't know them. It's a very odd situation if you think about it. The worst thing in our own mind that could possibly happen to us is going to happen to us. That's like a really bad thing. And then we've no idea when that's going to happen. We couldn't be in a more worrying situation. Like, it requires some kind of strong adjective to explain, even something more Anglo-Saxon, to get the full weight of that. And yet, we don't really know it either. We sort of forget it. So it's understandable to forget your keys or to forget my book, but to forget you're going to die is rather a big thing to forget. And yet we seem to both know it and not know it. There must be more to think about that, because that is odd. It's true that we know it, and it's also true that we don't know it. Yeah. But it seems that Siddhartha found a moment when he did know it. I don't want to go with this now. So, sometimes we do know it. I've had my moment, you know those moments sometimes when you wake up in the middle of the night and you suddenly know it, that you're going to die. I had a phase not so long ago where my death seemed very imminent to me. I just seemed to know it more. And I didn't like my knowledge. To keep one eye on the time, I tend to rabbit on. You know what I mean? Sometimes you do know it. Sometimes it gets closer, and it's a chill, isn't it? For some people, it gets very close indeed, and frightens the life out of you. Stops you sleeping, stops you working. Some of the reasons why people come to Buddhism is because they've been brushed by death and they've been chilled by the encounter. I remember a while ago reading Brian McGee's book, Confessions of a Philosopher, which is the most exciting philosophy book I've ever read, I think. I've only read 2. No, I take it back 3. Anyway, it's really good. I'm afraid I'm given to rather grand statements. Hang on, you've only read 3. Anyway, let's move on. We'll edit that out, shall we? I'm much better edited, actually. It seemed to make sense. And Brian McGee talks about this midlife crisis he had, where he really knew that he was going to die. And he said for a long time everything seemed utterly futile, and that everybody else around him just doing the normal stuff seemed utterly futile. So we're brushed sometimes we do know, but what's interesting about that, interesting is the wrong word, but what's perhaps relevant about that is often it's too terrifying to usefully contemplate. We're just locked into the headlight of fear. The great study of this, the great essay in this, is Larkin's late poem, Orbaid, which is his morning song. That Orbaid means a morning song. And it's like a pitch-perfect description of fear of death, waking up and saying the whole of death one day nearer now. So sometimes we are touched by death, and you see how either the response is terrifying fear, or it's despondency, despair, and nihilism. if we're not careful, we're touched by death without positivity to deal with that. But I want to also say we can never have enough positivity to deal with that. I'll come back to that in a minute. But we're touched by death, and we can't contemplate it because it's too terrifying. With small children in my life now, what I've also realised is a new kind of death has arisen, which is their death, or the possibility of their harm even, which is a new fear. So I didn't expect that. There's a new love, but there's also a new fear. Parents know this. I'm not a parent, but I've got closer to them than I ever expected. Long story. It gave rise to a new kind of fear, which I've never had before. Suddenly, what could happen to them? All parents know that fear. There's nothing quite so chilling. So, where I want to go with that, and we'll be coming back, don't worry folks, to connecting with the Buddha, is that the important thing to remember about that is that we don't know what death is. And it's very difficult to remember that we don't know. None of us know what death is. Nobody knows what death is. So when I said to Alex, when she said, what happens when you die, I said, no one knows, no one really knows. And I could have said, the rabbi doesn't know, the imam doesn't know, the priest doesn't know, the scientist doesn't know, the Buddhist doesn't know. No one knows what happens when you die. I don't know. My parents don't know. You don't know. None of us know. It's, after all this time, we have no idea what happens when you die. And into that space of not knowing, what we have instead is ideas, views, deeply held assumptions about what death means. And in the modern West, modern being probably since the Renaissance, what we've come to feel more and more strongly is what death means is the end of everything. What death means is nothingness forever. I can't remember how Larkin described it in that wonderful description of the absolute emptiness we are moving to. But you see, we don't know what death is. What we have is beliefs about death. And our beliefs make it terrifying, make it utterly terrifying. We don't know what it is, we've got beliefs. But you see how we mistake our beliefs for facts. So in the modern West, with this sort of nihilistic, individualistic culture that we've got, we think we know what death is. Actually, all we've got is an absence of evidence. And even then, that's only very selective, because there is evidence for rebirth. Evidence is the wrong word, really, but there is quite a lot to suggest it's possible. I won't rehearse it now. But when we say there's lack of evidence, what we mean is we're very selective about what evidence we want to admit. So what we've created out of death is something terrifying that we can't contemplate. So it seems to me that we're in this weird position where we know and don't know it. We often don't pay it any attention at all and live as if we're going to live forever in a world of triviality and dross and time wasting. My own theory is that the 21st century will become the age of time wasting, just as the 20th century was the age of anxiety. It's never been easier to waste time. So we know and don't know it, but when we do know it, when we get closer to it, what we're getting closer to is our beliefs about it, which make death terrifying. So we can't contemplate it. So do you see, if we just have these first three sites that we need to come into contact with, old age, sickness and death, which we do need to do, we all of us need to step closer to it. Because it's going to step closer to us. In fact, it is stepping closer to us as we speak, as it were. And we need to go out and embrace it. How we do that is rather difficult, because we don't know what it is. We've got beliefs and we don't know. So do you see how the three sites aren't enough? And sometimes we overemphasize the three sites. What you have to have is the fourth site. Now the fourth site is usually described as the Buddha. He goes out attack. He's had this terrible confrontation with death. which, completely turns his life upside down. Perhaps some of you have already had something of that confrontation to a greater or a lesser degree. And however you have that confrontation, it turns your life upside down. But then he goes out again, and how I imagine it and how I've written about it in the book is that he goes into the crowded market square, and just for a moment the crowds pass, and he sees a yellow-robed figure, a wandering sadhu, a holy man. And then my imagination is the crowds close in again and it's gone. Just a glimpse. And it's a beautiful metaphor, isn't it? For our experience of the Buddha, actually. For Siddhartha, it's almost like those films where they see themselves in the future. That's how I'm starting to think of it as I'm actually standing here in front of you. Is that it's like the Buddha seeing himself in the future. I think it is, do you see, it's an ancient Indian metaphor for seeing your potential. This is what I mean. You could never use that language, and then I saw my potential, which anyway isn't a very good metaphor because it's yours. If you think of Siddhartha seeing the Buddha he was to become, that would be just the same as seeing somebody utterly different. It would feel as strange as that. Just as you get the myth of the return journey, the son sees his father and is terrified because he feels so estranged from him. It's the same metaphor, I think, that the Siddhartha sees who he will become and doesn't recognise it as being him because it's not recognisable. Yeah? So it's a glimpse of your potential Buddhahood. It's a glimpse of what human beings are capable of at their absolute best and highest. Yeah? That's really our connection with the Buddha. And it's interesting that it's via a confrontation with old age, sickness and death. It comes to us once we've left the palace of ourself. It comes to us to the degree to which we've left behind our habitual mindset. It comes to us when we take risks. It comes to us when we go beyond our comfort zone. It comes to us when we decide not to react, but to respond creatively. And it comes to us by a confrontation with the facts of life. But you see that the facts of life aren't enough. If with just the facts of life in themselves, we'll just slip into nihilism, into despair, into despondency. Because we believe that death is the absolute end of everything, which is a belief, it's not a fact. It's a modern belief. It's a belief that we were born with. It's a modern belief. So this seeing of the Buddha is our contact with this foresight, is our connection with the Buddha. And it's a very good image for it because it's a glimpse. You don't need Siddhartha in my imagination of it, doesn't get time to look at it very carefully. Just certainly doesn't get time to talk to him, doesn't get time to say, where are you going, can I follow you? None of that. It's just a glimpse and then it's gone. And isn't that so often our experience, that we glimpse something and then it's gone? I mean, and then it carries on, folks. I've just been on this 4-month retreat and I definitely glimpsed something, even quite a few times, more than usual. And I remember thinking, when I get back, I must not do this. Like I decided not to eat chocolate alone. It seems like sort of the Buddhist version of alcoholism. You shouldn't drink alone and you shouldn't eat chocolate alone. And then literally about 5 days after I got back there, I was eating some chocolate on my own anyway. You know what it's like, you go on a retreat, you have all these hopes for who you'll be when you get back, but the glimpse closes. Part of wisdom there is keep on putting yourself in conditions in which you do get a glimpse. Our responsibility as Buddhists, to the degree to which we feel like that, especially as we're order members, we need to particularly be careful to keep putting ourselves in conditions in which we get a glimpse. Otherwise we'll fall back into the comfort or discomfort of the palace or the prison that we're our habitual self, or we'll fall into nihilism and so on. So we need this fourth side. Without it, we can't make progress. So what I'm trying to say in the book is that once we have something of the fourth sight, our task in life is to develop a fit mind, to create a mind that can live up to the fourth sight, we can develop a mind that can hold the fourth sight in mind, that can keep on coming back to that connection. Connection, do you see how connection is the wrong word? Glimpse of the Buddha. Glimpse of the Buddha even. Just perhaps we haven't seen a wandering holy man, perhaps we just saw the slightest glimmer of gold and it was gone. It's much more like that to us. And the crowd between us and the Buddha is extremely dense, extremely noisy, and extremely preoccupied with ordinary life. And we usually get involved with that really, really quickly, don't we? We want to get across to meet the wandering holy man, to meet the Buddha, but before we know it, we're shopping and, buying a new sweater or something. I don't want to go now. So do you see that where we've gone so far is we don't know who the Buddha is. We sort of do. I've been following the story of Siddhartha, leaving the palace and seeing old age, sickness and death. We need to do that, but that's not enough. We need to embrace that much more. I don't always know how we do that because platitudes don't help. In fact, they inoculate you against the truth of those things. Even sometimes other people's illness, old age and death doesn't help because we can think that, oh yes, they get old and die, but I organise things better. They're not like really clear. That isn't going to happen to me. I'm not going to die. The place to read this actually is Tolstoy's short story, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is a tremendous study in this whole thing of death and knowing whether you can live. But for most of us, we can't face that confrontation with old age, sickness and death because we believe it's a complete destruction of everything we love, and we're terrified of that. So we've got to have the fourth sight in order to start to traverse the path. It's only to the degree we've seen something that beyond life. This is partly the reason we're thinking in my mind is I'm very concerned that Buddhism could be sort of misinterpreted. That's all it is, isn't it, that word? Yeah. Misinterpreted as this world-only religion, tradition. That basically what we do is we see that there's old age, sickness and death, and we really face up to that, we're like really peaceful with it. That is not Buddhism. That is a kind of stoicism at best, and really a kind of happy nihilism. Be careful with my sense of humour. Nietzsche, for instance, thought he was very concerned about Buddhism because he thought that's what it was. He thought it was a kind of benign nihilism where you just accepted, like a cow grazing in a field, you just sort of chewed your cud and then died, and you were quite all right with it. That's how he understood Buddhism. There was very little said about Buddhism then, so he couldn't have got it better. So do you see the three sights? We've got to have this fourth sight, and we've got to know what it means. And it means a sight of something that goes, I put it in the book as something more than life. And I want to italicize more. I mean more in a mystical sense, not more in a acquisitive sense, if you see what I mean. I mean more in that mystical sense. That there is more to life than living and dying, basically. I even want to say there's something beyond life. And this is where we move fully into the terrain of religion. At the moment, I'm in a religious mood. It depends. I've been saying recently, people ask me whether Buddhism is a religion or a philosophy, and I want to say it depends what mood I'm in, but it also depends who I'm talking to. But my concern at the moment, and it'll probably change by tomorrow, is that we could turn Buddhism into an adjustment therapy, where we're just adjusting to the uncomfortable facts of life in a kind of skillful way. A lot to be said for that. I'm not trying to decry it, but it's not Buddhism. Buddhism can include that, but it goes well beyond it. So the fourth sight is the sight of something that goes beyond life. I want to use that metaphorically because I mean beyond all of our assumptions about life, including that consciousness is in the brain, that when my brain dies, consciousness dies, including the fact that myself and the world are separate, including the fact that time exists, that space and time exist, that space, time and causality are life. That vision of the holy man, the vision of the Buddha for us, is a vision of something that goes beyond all of those categories. The closer we get to that true vision, embodied by the wandering holy man, which, as I say, I think is Siddhartha seeing for a moment his future. And it's us seeing for a moment him. Or perhaps we're seeing for a moment Siddhartha seeing his future. The reason I wanted to bring that up so much is so, with that truest perspective, as we then develop a fit mind to live in accordance with that, where there is a more to life, there is a transcendent more to life, that our categories of living, male and female, inside and outside, time, causality, space, and so on, that is just an illusion. All of it is an illusion, and that there is more than that. I'd rather leave it just as a more, ... if you see me. If we can do that, as we travel genuinely with that, not just because you can't understand that, you have to live that, you have to perceive that. You experience it directly. It's not a concept. It's something that you touch. The more you can follow that hunch, the more you can fight your way through the crowd of consumerism, of individualism, of sectarianism, all these isms that we're surrounded by. The more you can fight your way through that crowd and follow the Buddha, the more you start to realise that old age, sickness and death are not the problem that you thought they were. The closer you get to the real truth, it's not that the truth of old age, sickness and death. That's not a truth because we don't know what it is, it's a belief. The closer you can get to the Buddha is the closer you get to a realisation that you've got the whole thing wrong. Old age, sickness and death, space and time, causality, the whole darn thing you've misunderstood. There is another mode of consciousness that transcends those polarities. And you see how it's very difficult for us to imagine this other mode of consciousness. So we need to create a figure that's covered in gold to say, it's like that, it's like that. I don't know if you've ever tried to explain to a child that you've got a different perception than they have. You can't do it. You can't say to a child, no, I see it like this, you see. So when you try and get them to bed, or if you try ever asking a child, are you tired? They can look like a panda, and they say no, because for them it's an insult. You are just effectively insulting them. So they absolutely have to deny it. You can't say, look, I'm an adult, I can actually see you're tired, so I'm going to take you to bed, because I know that you'll be much better. You can't do that. You have to just manage them. Do you see the Buddha's relationship to us is like that? We're a child, he has a quite different consciousness that is beyond space and time, beyond you and me. He can't explain it to us. He will just get it wrong. What he can say is, tell you what, wait till you grow up. I'll do that.